Welcome to the Traveling Image Makers podcast, your source of inspiration about travel photography. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride as we bring you on a tour around the world with our guests.
So hi, Colby. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
It's my pleasure. Actually, been chasing you for quite some time.
It's been a number of years, huh?
It's been some. I mean, I think we got to know each other through Google Plus back in years ago, and then when I started the podcast, I think I contacted some people and tell Colby if you want to come on the show.
Absolutely.
But I guess you were busy traveling and doing workshops and whatnot. You were kind of busy, so now it's maybe the silver lining of having to stay home is that I could get you and find you with some time from home where we can finally have the chance to talk.
Absolutely. You got to find silver linings in 2020. And, it's interesting. I mean, you said Google Plus. It's hard to imagine how many years it's been when Google Plus launched and the photography community kind of flocked there, and like so many digital relationships formed, yourself and myself and a lot of other people that, had stayed connected over the years because of that initial community. And here we are, even after Google Plus is gone, and so many of us have stayed connected on Facebook or Instagram or other smaller groups. And it's been pretty great, actually, even if Google Plus didn't work out, that we built this big community that has somewhat been resilient to breaking apart, even though the platform itself is no longer here.
Absolutely. I remember I was on Google Plus and I got to know you, and I have I think I remember there was 5,000 people that you could have in your circles. And I added 5,000 photographers there, essentially. Because Google Plus was all about interest, right?
Yeah.
Shared interests.
Yep.
And I was interested in photography. I was starting as a professional back then, and I was started in photography, and I wanted to network with as many people as possible. And it was great with Google Plus. And I never used Facebook a lot. I was on Facebook, but I just had some few connections. Then when people started, there was news that Google Plus was going to be phased out, shut down. We started moving to Facebook and recreating all those connections. But I don't think they would have happened on Facebook the way they happened on Google Plus, and then translated. And as you said, they were maintained, those connections on Facebook.
100% agree. 100% agree.
Yeah. So I said you were traveling a lot, but now there's not a lot of chances to travel. So what's keeping you busy? I see for the people who are not, we are watching the video here, and they can see your nice setup on your back. But for those who are just listening to the audio version of the podcast, I see you got a nice microphone, awesome light, 3 monitors, and so on. So you built your own home professional audio video recording studio.
Yeah, that's right. That has been, as we talked about before, it's been one of the silver linings for 2020 for me. There's been a lot of things over the years. I mean, I've been doing this professionally for 15 years now. 16 years now. 15 years now. And throughout that time, I mean, I predominantly do international travel. So every year I'm usually traveling 6-7 months out of the year. I'm traveling to all 7 continents. I'm working on projects and expeditions and leading workshops. And within that, I've been very fortunate, to build my companies and to make good money and to constantly stay busy. But it's also put off a lot of these other ideas that I've always wanted to do. And one of those ideas kind of has come to fruition this year because of the lack of travel, is building a home studio so that I have a professional space that I am confident in, that I think visually and audibly is at the level that I'm happy with, to be able to push out more content, to be able to create more marketing campaigns for companies, to do video pieces and gear reviews, to do more tutorial work that I have already done, where I've worked with companies like, Capture One and Phase One and Adobe and On One Photo Raw, and I can do more stuff for them. I can also do more stuff for my own store. And this gives me the professional space to do so, and maintain that level of quality that I am kind of a stickler for, which has been a hindrance in the past because I have, not wanted to do so much because I felt that my studio wasn't ready yet or these other things. it's one of the negative sides of my own personality that I kind of like things to be at a certain level before I really dive in. And so sometimes that causes delays, and this is a 14-year delay in the making, but we're actually finally here, and I have this together, and I've been able to create a lot of content this year that I wouldn't have otherwise. So
we can expect to see more from you in this respect. You said you're going to do these videos for clients. Yeah. I saw some tutorials you did for B&H, I think.
Yeah. From, a lot of the clients I've been doing work with is, of course, B&H, Dell, Sony. I have some upcoming projects with Intel. I'm doing work with other camera manufacturers, whether it's tripods or filters or other stuff. You'll be seeing a lot more gear reviews. There'll be some things that are, obviously a lot of the free stuff out there for everyone on, building up more of a YouTube, like a lot of other photographers there that are putting a bit more emphasis on video content these days than just still photography. So it's a bit of a smorgasbord. It's the idea of diversifying the types of content that I'm putting out there and the platforms that I'm using so that I'm not reliant in any single one thing, and I can constantly be able to ebb and flow and move with the ever-changing industry that we have and dealing with things like COVID and other stuff where I can kind of pivot on the fly and not have too much of a hit on revenue streams and be able to focus on something else for a few months if things change or if we have another interruption or disruption in travel and stuff like that. So it's, the age-old saying of don't put all your eggs in one basket. I learned long ago the importance and significance of diversifying. And so diversifying revenue streams, diversifying clients, diversifying the products and services that I offer are all fun challenges that I think a lot of photographers should, take a serious look at these days.
Are you planning or are you already doing some kind of online education for photographers?
Yeah.
Directly, because I see a lot of people, me included, I never did too much online education. I did some webinars and so on, but I'm doing more just because, there's not much else we can do. So
it's
we need to move so how do you see, so my first question would be if you're going to do more in this respect. And since everybody's pretty much doing this, how can people find something good, and how can you create good educational projects? What it takes and what people should look into when they're like, oh, there's a bunch of courses out there and everybody's doing webinars,
sure,
whether paid for free. How do you tell quality education from just random people doing vlogs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think regardless of 2020 and the pandemic and this kind of onslaught of a lot of more educational opportunities coming out there for people like myself and yourself to create it and other people to consume it, is that, both you and I know that there's a big difference between a good photographer and a good teacher. And I think that there's a lot of amazing photographers out there, but there are fewer good teachers. And unfortunately, the reality is that for a lot of the time when it comes to people consuming this type of content is that you just have to start and take a bit of a leap of faith. You have to find content from a photographer that you admire and either get it for free or purchase it, as depending on how they offer it, and see if it speaks to you. A good educator can meet people at their level and can explain things in a digestible way that inspires them to want to take that information and to somewhat make it their own and create their own works of art and things like that. And I think that requires that experimentation and that test, so to speak, to buy people's stuff. I've had clients of mine that have bought tutorials from very well-known photographers on social media that have millions of followers and have been disappointed because it wasn't what they were expecting. And that can happen no matter what. And so you kind of have to figure out where your line is and what you're looking for in order to learn from. Right now, it's a beautiful time to be a photo enthusiast because there's so many people, again, like you and I, that are creating amazing content out there. And, there are people that will relate and resonate with us individually. And some of it will be collectively, depending on if people are into landscape work or wildlife photography or portrait photography or learning lighting or video work. There's all sorts of great resources out there. For people that are trying to figure it out, it's a bit of a guess or check, check out reviews, check out what other people say. But oftentimes it requires just you diving in and figuring out, or is the content good? Is the video and audio good enough for you to be able to follow along? Are they speaking to you slow enough for you to understand, so you don't have to keep rewinding every 15 seconds for a segment? How do you access the content? Is this stuff that you can download that is yours forever? Do you have to stream it? There's all sorts of different nuances within this space that not only content creators like us have to figure out, but also you guys, content consumers, have to figure out how to what works best for you, I guess is what I should say. So if you find someone that you think is creating work that inspires you, and see if they have any free content, and if they do, check that out. And if it works for you, maybe purchase some stuff from them and support them. And then maybe you can find a couple other ones as well if you have the financial ability to. And that way you can learn from a mixture of people, and then eventually you'll gravitate towards a certain kind of person, or a certain individual or groups of individuals that will then continue to create content that you can continue to consume as you are furthering your own creative pathway and navigating the creative waters that we're all kind of running through.
Interesting that you mentioned speaking slowly enough. It just occurred to me something that I never considered, but right, we now live in a global world.
Yeah.
And of course you will produce courses, videos, and so on in English. Any type of content you produce in English, but there's a lot of people, including me, for whom English is not their mother tongue. And I pride myself in being able to understand English pretty well, but I think a lot of Italians like me, they don't have the same level of understanding. So
sure,
if you want to reach those people for whom English is a second language, it's important to consider your language, what you say, not just don't speak too fast.
Yeah.
Don't use too much maybe jargon or jokes that only people from a certain culture will be able to understand and grasp. That's kind of a responsibility that you have there to be understood by people outside the borders of US, UK, and Canada, Australia, and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, this, from your workshops, I imagine you get a mixture of people that have come on your trips from, English speakers to non-native speakers. And it's, again, it comes down to teaching. It comes down to speaking clearly, choosing your words carefully, demonstrating what you're trying to demonstrate in a clear and discernible way, and making sure people get what they want out of the content that you're creating or selling, depending on how it is. And so all are very important facets. And yeah, you're 100% right. We are in a global community, and not only, geopolitically and all this other stuff outside of the photo industry, but just, between travel, between interests, between these communities, like we said, started in Google+. I have followers and hundreds of thousands of people on different social platforms from all over the world. And I want to be able to reach as many people as possible and help inspire and educate as many people. So I want to make sure that I'm reaching those individuals that, don't want to listen to me talk 100 miles an hour, and, make sure they understand what I'm trying to say. And to convey that, I think, is, again, a representative of a good educator, of a good teacher. And sometimes those are harder to find than just a photographer that creates exceptional work. And so that's why it requires that experimentation to say, hey, this person's great. I'm going to pick up the tutorial, and maybe it works for me. Maybe it doesn't. But sometimes you don't know until you actually dive in and watch it for the first time.
Sure. We mentioned social media, and we talked about Google Plus at the beginning of our conversation. And I was just reminded that you wrote a book about Google Plus, right? Google Plus for photographers.
I did.
You were, as I said, very active back then on social media. And as your approach to social media changed during the years, and how can people, do you think people still can make a dent or make a name for themselves using social media nowadays? Or it looks like it's become more difficult, right?
Yeah.
Facebook is limiting the stream, and if you don't pay for your posts to be boosted, nobody will see them, and so on. What's the scenario right now? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right to some extent. I mean, I think the people that tend statistically to have the largest following are those individuals that got in right when a social media platform started taking off. You and myself got in Google Plus like right away. You know, we were able to have the benefit of being there the longest. We learned the ropes. I was able to write books that gave me notoriety. You know, we got into suggested user lists, like all sorts of different things that helped us grow followings. Instagram was the same way. You know, a lot of people that got on first when it started. Some of those individuals have millions of followers now because they've been producing content the longest. And it was a beacon of a representative of what a profile should be or could be for new users to come and land on a platform like Instagram. And then, I should follow this person. And then now that person just naturally is going to be growing, have grown larger than on the rest of us because they were there from, say, day one. And so there is some reality to that in the sense that, you know, if you're trying to get on any of these social platforms now, you know, your chances of being the next CRISPR card and having, 2 or 3 million followers is not impossible. It's just improbable, at least in the short term. You know, it can take time to build it. Now, that being said, you don't have to have a large following in order to get the benefit out of having a active and viable social media presence. Depending on what your end game is, depending on what your focus is, you can find quite a bit of success with a small to mid-level follower count or interactive rates, depending on what you want to do. Do you want to work on marketing campaigns with companies? Do you want to sell products and services? Are you looking to find clients in real life and using social media as a means in order to advertise and showcase what you are trying to offer? All of those are viable pathways to find success. And there are still ways that you can grow your following, even if it's slow, even if it might require occasionally a promoted post here or there to get your content in front of more people, or collaborating with larger, hubs on these different platforms to showcase your work so that hopefully you can get some more followers. Oftentimes it comes down more so to your intent and your strategy for what you want out of it to signify if it's worth your time or not. There are photographers out there that are doing just fine that don't have big social media presences because they have built their revenue streams not on reliant on social media. So it's not a requirement. It is just one of many pathways. And sometimes arguably you can say that it is potentially easier to use social media as a conduit in order to create more business, in order to find more clients, in order to connect with more individuals that might be interested in the products or services that you're trying to offer them. And so that's where I think social media can be beneficial. And if you're not doing this from the business purposes, there are still plenty of opportunities in these different social platforms between Facebook groups, Instagram chats, even private stuff that's happening on chat programs like WhatsApp or Signal, where you can find collaborative groups that are looking just to inspire each other and help each other out. And, it's like you edit a photo and then you send it to your group and they'll give you feedback because it's this kind of closed circle. Those are beneficial as well if you're just looking for education and inspiration. So there's a lot of opportunities to find benefit out of social media. But like I said in the beginning, you need to figure out or define what it is specifically that you're looking for. And then from there, you can develop a strategy in order to attain what you're after. Because if you don't have a strategy, then you're kind of just wandering aimlessly, and then you're never going to achieve your goal because you don't necessarily even really have a goal. You're kind of just there to be there.
Yeah, I see a lot of people, but sometimes myself included, they just put out stuff on social media without a lot of strategy, as you said, and hope to people to flock to their channel or page or whatever. Sure. It's not going to happen. You need to
it's
put
harder
some
to
thought
happen.
into it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes for me, I think what helps is to create almost like a business plan. Like a lot of people that start companies, photography companies, don't write out a business plan. And sometimes it's just that cathartic experience of writing out the different elements of what you're trying to do, storyboarding it, so to speak, creating a structure. Could be the same for a social media strategy. It's like you write down what is your end goal, and then you try to think logically, how do you get there? And sometimes just a simple act as doing something like that can clear your mind and help give you a bit more purpose and a bit more idea on how to achieve those different types of things. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but I still think social media is valuable, but you are still 100% correct that it can be harder to grow a larger following. But sometimes I think people are over romantically looking at the idea that they want a large following because other people have it rather than because it's necessarily beneficial to them.
Good. I don't know if you could hear the siren going by. So I don't have a nice studio like you with
no worries.
Sound-proof walls and everything. I'm living at the ground floor on a trafficked street, so sometimes there's traffic.
No worries.
So, but it's part of life.
Yeah,
and speaking of life, I mean, we've got this sound coming from outside, which reminds us that it's not everything is virtual, right? It's nice to be able to have these amazing tools, to have social media, to have Zoom that we are using right now to talk to each other over thousands of kilometers, but that's also real life. So let's talk a bit about what we normally call real life. And I wanted to ask you if you have any plans. What are your thoughts about going back to some kind of normal, again, going out, traveling, leading tours, workshops, and so on. So are you planning something or just staying there at the window, hoping that something will happen?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of both. There's uncertainty still. There's less uncertainty than there was a few weeks ago because we are, everyone listening, and we're now at the cusp of the beginning stages of the access for a vaccine or vaccines from multiple different companies for a look towards the potential, light at the end of the tunnel. Once enough of the world has had a vaccine or have taken enough precautions and we can figure out ways to combat COVID, that I think things will change. And I think it's prudent for photographers to prepare and plan for that eventuality because it is going to happen. There will be some sense of a new normal. Maybe we all carry cards like we currently have to do to travel to certain countries for yellow fever, for example. We might have to have one that shows that we have our COVID vaccine and when we had it and stuff like that. And so as a photography, as a photo education and a, content creation, based companies that I own, we have to prepare for the reality that that's going to happen. So I am putting together all the logistics and planning for tons of workshops, a handful, lots of workshops for next year, 2021. But I can say that the vast majority of them, I am not realistically expecting, in either of my clients, anything to happen before the summer of next year. And that is just a reality based on the number of people that can get vaccinations, how many vaccinations are being made, how many places and what rules and regulations are going to be put in place for anywhere between international flying to getting visas to enter countries to all sorts of other things for international type of work. But we have to be prepared. Eventually the floodgates will open. Eventually whatever the new normal is going to look like is going to be here. And if you wait till that time in order to prepare, you're going to be behind the curve because there's a lot of people out there, I'm sure you know this, that are chomping at the bit, that are just wanting to go out, waiting for it to be safe. I have huge wait lists for a vast majority of my workshops of people that just want to get out and do something. And they're just waiting on the definitive dates that I have. Some of them I've set, some of them I haven't just yet in some of these countries so that we can prepare and plan for that and also have built in, redundancy plans in case, there are delays or that a workshop has to be delayed for a few months or things like that. It's not an easy place to be in order to plan all those types of eventualities. But I think that we have to start that conversation. We have to be prepared. And I'm looking forward to it because it is going to happen. It's going to look a bit different, especially at first than what we've been used to before 2020. But we will be back traveling in 2021. And I'm looking forward to it. And I think a lot of people out there as well. So yeah, I realistically, long-winded answer to your question. I think something after, at the minimum, April, May of next year, but more realistically, kind of early summer to next fall is probably more realistic for any type of international travel workshops and things like that when it comes to our companies and liability and all sorts of other fun things, let alone visas and other, what other rules and regulations are going to be in place that we will all have to abide by.
You kind of anticipated my next question. You said it. It's going to be, yes, we're going to go back to travel. I certainly believe that with the vaccines, or we're going to eventually go back to traveling. But I'm not sure if you agree, but there's going to be a new normal, but the new normal will not be like the old normal.
Sure.
Things will have to change. You mentioned having maybe to carry a card or certificates that you've been vaccinated or something like that. But there's also going to be probably a change in the way that people think about travel,
sure,
about their own travel. I don't know what it's going to be like. Will people be wanting to travel more since now they've been locked at their place for so long that they will just be there at the gates and they will just, when the gates open, they will flood the market? Or they will be just, let's wait a little bit more, see how things go, things will pick up slowly.
Sure.
Will people maybe, I was thinking this is just thinking off the top of my head. I didn't spend any real time considering it, but maybe people will want to avoid certain places, certain locations that have become overly popular and crowded.
Sure.
So, like, not everybody will want to go to, Santorini in Greece, just thinking of the first location that came to my mind, which is usually very popular and very crowded. And people will want to discover places that are a bit less popular, less crowded, just to avoid the crowd because they're still a bit worried about being in the company of too many people. Did you try to figure out what the new normal will be?
Yeah, I mean, I think those things are very much going to be reality, and you have a handful of different variables at play here. Depending on, like, every company is a little bit different in terms of people that lead workshops. So the individuals that come on your trips or someone's trips are generally of a certain age group. Some people are older that have more expendable income. Some people are younger, depending on how you market, depending on all sorts of other things. And so if you have a group of if your demographic base tends to be a little bit older, I think there's going to be more trepidation. There's going to be more precaution. I think, people waiting. I think if you have a younger demographic of people, a lot of people that come on my workshops, for example, I'm fortunate in that regard, are anywhere between their 20s to, mid 40s, is on average is what I typically get or have gotten in the past. And so I think that type of age group might be a little bit more keen to get out there more quickly, regardless of how close in proximity we are toward, to vaccines and how the vaccines are going to be spread around the world. In addition to that, you also have the uncertainty with income. So it's not necessarily just the uncertainty of, can we travel? What are going to be the rules? A lot of people have had, their income and their revenue cut or hurt, or they've had to be laid off work or other things. So what, the question of what are the people that are want to do workshops, that can't afford to do workshops, what is that going to look like? Is that going to change? And I don't necessarily have that answer just yet, but it definitely is going to be a big variable that's going to come into play. And then that, as you said, mixed in with location, I think is a big thing. I think the big locations, going to Angkor Wat in Cambodia to shoot sunrise in Phnom Penh might not be on everyone's high list to be crowded with 500 other people shoulder to shoulder to shoot sunrise at the little reflection ponds in front of those amazing ancient temples. Where you might find some more success or more interest is in a lot of places that I typically work these days are a bit more remote, and that's some of my own choosing, and also because I've gotten a little bit personally bored of some of those other locations that are typically a little bit overpopulated. Where if I go to Patagonia in Chile and Argentina, there's a lot less people there than there are in a lot of other places. Or if I go down to Antarctica, if I go on a safari, take clients down into a safari in South Africa, we're going to have our private group in our private vehicle. And we're going to stay on a compound that has a very set number of people. So the threat of transmission or worry about anything related to COVID will be limited or regulated to the transit period, the being in airports and stuff like that. So I think you're right. I think where people go, I think will be a key. I think income and revenue streams will be a key. I think demographics will be a key, and access to vaccines will all play a role. And I don't think any of us really have those answers just yet, but I think that just talking about it, thinking about it, and attempting to prepare and plan for that type of eventuality or reality is a good practice regardless. But it's going to be a new normal. You're 100% right. It's not going to be like it was before, at least for the foreseeable future.
Now, another one of your initiatives that we talked about it with our common friend, Kate Chevon Mulligan, is the Giving Lens. She was our guest in an episode quite some time ago. And for those who have not heard about the Giving Lens or have not listened to our podcast back then, we'll put a link in the show note for it. But do you want to tell our listeners what is the Giving Lens and what are the plans for that, maybe post this pandemic period?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that don't know, the Giving Lens is an organization that I founded back in 2011 that aims to blend the passion that we have as creatives for photography with giving back to communities through organizational support around the world. So essentially what we do is we take teams of photographers to various different countries where we partner with a local organization, NGO, charity, that is fighting for a very specific cause. Sometimes it's youth education. Sometimes it's women's vocational schools. Sometimes it's refugee support, like Syrian refugees. We've done some work with them. We've done work with families coming up in the caravans from Central America up to the U.S. We've done that in Mexico earlier this year. And through those experiences, we teach these photographers how to be better photographers, but we're also using it as collaborative learning environments to work with these organizations to document their projects, to help them raise money. The trips themselves act as fundraisers for these organizations. So photographers have a tangible way to come and have an experience that they couldn't get otherwise because of the behind closed door access that we get to these communities, where they know that the money that they are providing to the Giving Lens is going back to these communities to help the people that they're working hand in hand with, to make a difference at a local level. And it's evolved over the years. It's been amazing to see kind of what it's become. Kate runs it for me now. She's done an incredible job. She's an amazing photographer and an amazing organizer. And yeah, post 2020, we're doing the same things that we were just talking about in terms of trying to get a feel for what travel is going to look like. As you can imagine, one of the first things that typically gets cut when economies start to get hit is philanthropic work, is donating to causes. And so a lot of these organizations, especially in these developing countries that we work with, are having seriously hard times trying to fundraise, trying to find ways in order to stay afloat to help the communities that they're working in. And so we're trying to be proactive to find new ways in order to reach more people. We're creating new initiatives to create more content to educate people. We're looking at the opportunity to do some stuff, at least locally, or maybe not locally, but nationally in the U.S. and Canada, as we wait for the international borders to open, or U.S. residents to begin to be able to start to travel again, in order to help, people like First Nations in Canada and things like that. And then once we can open up, we want to get back and continuing to support the communities that we have been working with, as well as developing new relationships with new causes, in new locations that have issues and challenges because they don't have the advocacy. They don't, no one's telling their story. They're not able to fundraise. And so we're going to help go in and try to, train these organizations in how to create better content. We're going to provide them with, fundraising. We're going to bring photographers down to document their projects. And we're going to try to find new and progressive ways in order to help combat and be a viable voice in this side of the art community, with those that want to make a difference out there and that want to help these organizations that desperately need it right now.
I think this is very important. And I like the name, The Giving Lens, because too often or too many people, when they travel for photography for any other reason. They go to foreign countries, developing countries and so on, and they think about what they can take from those places, right? We talk about taking pictures.
Yep.
Or we talk about taking memories home. And turning the thing on its head and talking about giving something back, I think it's very important. I'm very thankful that you are doing this. I think it's very, very important. So,
I appreciate that. Not to dive into it too much because I know we have other things to talk about, but that in itself was one of the core reasons why I ended up starting the Giving Lens. That the reality that I saw when I first started traveling, even way back in 2005, 2006, of how most tourists and certainly still travel photographers were involved in this one-way street of experience when we traveled. It was, as you said, it was very take, me. I'm going to take your picture. I'm going to walk away. You're never going to see me again. I've benefited from this. You haven't. And that never sat well with me. And that's, I liked the idea of breaking down that wall, breaking down that barrier, and finding something that is mutually beneficial to help these communities, to give photographers, like I said, that tangible means in order to know where your money's going, to work with people that need it, to make a difference, and to do all of it within a community that is, looking for some assistance to help empower themselves so that they can continue to define their own future, rather than just have a bunch of, foreigners come in and attempt to solve their problems. Like, that has never worked in history. And so we definitely want to avoid that kind of cycle of dependence. We want to find ways in order to work with these communities at their level, with their needs, and help in the ways that we can specialize in, and listen and learn from them as well, because I think that's a big part of it that typically gets lost, sadly, in the humanitarian side of, most industries, irrespective of just the photography industry.
Great. I would like now to ask you more of a personal question. That is, sure. Once you will finally be able to travel, especially abroad, what's the first place that you will want to go?
Ooh, that's a good question. My career has been interesting over the years because I've kind of done a handful of different things. I started off focusing on travel, and then I had a big focus on landscape, remote locations for a while. And these days, a lot of my passion has been tied towards wildlife photography, conservation efforts and things like that. And while I still do all three of them interchangeably throughout the year, I think the thing I've missed the most out of not traveling outside of March has been wildlife. I started off 2000. I celebrated New Year's of 2020 in Uganda, tracking silverback gorillas in the Bwindi impenetrable forest, and I thought it was going to be a good foray into what to expect with 2020. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that it was going to be my last wildlife adventure for the year, and so I think it's that. I think whether it's tracking silverback gorillas in Uganda, I'm really, really keen to get back there. Have plans and projects putting together to get back to Brazil to do work in the Pantanal region with jaguars. I think those are keen. In my own personal experience, things that I want to get back to that I've been visiting for years and just long for. And then some new ones as well. I was in the middle of putting together a snow leopard expedition in Mongolia, and in that region in the mountains out there, and that had to be put on hold, and now I'm excited to kind of revamp and restart those conversations and kind of start to plan for some new stuff that I haven't experienced myself as well. But that would be the long-winded answer of what am I thinking of. One of my first trips is going to be wildlife focused.
It's pretty specific.
Yeah.
Even though it's not tied to a specific country, but yeah, wildlife is something that is always great, and it attracts myself as well.
Yeah, so. It's fun. It's challenging, right? Yeah, it's fun working with models that don't know their models, that don't listen to you all the time. I think that challenge is what I love and what I miss a bit about not. I live in Eastern Pennsylvania here in the East Coast, and I can photograph deer and bald eagles, and we have some black bears and some stuff here, and it's not bad. It's great. I enjoy it. But there's something about being on the ground with a creature like a gorilla, or swimming around the waters with caimans and crocodiles, or I don't know, just different things like that. Just really kind of gets me excited. And I think that is, again, a part of what I'm missing most, is that challenge and that excitement that I've I haven't had this year because I've been fortunate to spend a ton of time with my family, which has been amazing. It's more time I've spent this year at home with my wife and son since I've been married for 10 years, which was an interesting conversation me and my wife had a few times this year. But that being said, I think once the gates open and once we're able to safely travel, I'm eager to get back out there in the world and, to see more, to experience more, to capture more, as I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah. I know you have a tour planned to the Dolomites.
Yes.
If it happens this year or next year.
Yep.
So I hope maybe we can meet up face to face there. It's quite close to where I live.
Absolutely.
There's not a lot of wildlife, but you can find some wildlife there.
Sure.
Maybe a bear encounter occasionally.
Well, outside of the wildlife
Deer,
stuff,
ibex,
birds. I think my favorite, wildlife is definitely my more recent, sustained passion. But I think, long running has been mountains, mountain ranges, the cold, crisp air, beautiful sunrises and sunsets, mountain lakes. Those are also bring me to a happy place. I lived in Colorado and Boulder for 10 years. I grew up in the Sierra Nevada mountains around Yosemite when I first, came into this world. I have a special place in my heart, like I said, for places like Patagonia. And the Alps and what you guys have out there in Italy are phenomenal as well. And so those type of places also get me excited. Even if there's not going to be wildlife there, I'm still very looking forward to that trip, which hopefully will happen next fall.
There's a bit of wildlife. It's quite or I will say I don't know the word, but it's a place there's quite some people. It's not as wild as you might think, as Patagonia, right?
Sure.
There's
Sure.
towns and villages and roads and tourists. So the wildlife tends to be a bit shy and stay away from the main roads, but still you can find some. It's especially birds. There's some great birds there.
Nice.
So
Good to know.
If you're into that. Bring a long lens, not just for landscape. Bring a lens for birding.
Touche.
Anyway, it's been great to talk to you finally and have this conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to mention before we wrap it up?
I don't think too much. I mean, obviously you guys listening, if you guys have any questions about what we talked about, or if you're interested in any of the stuff that I have coming up, you're obviously more than welcome to visit my website at colbybrownphotography.com or follow me on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or any of the social stuff out there. I'm very approachable as well. If you guys have questions about gear or stuff like that, shoot me an email. I can't always get back to you right away, but I am happy to help however I can. And the little bit of advice I just give to everyone else that's listening as well along those same lines is, to hold strong. Stay safe out there. We are at the beginning of the end of all the craziness of 2020 and what it's brought to us. We will be able to travel soon again at some point. There is promise out there. There's a lot of good still happening out there in the world. Don't get inundated with all the negative news and all the other stuff that's out there. Try to find silver linings, as you and I talked about today. Believe in positivity, and, I hope to see at least some of you guys out there once we can start traveling, and especially you once I get to Italy next fall in the bare minimum, at least then.
Of course. Stay positive.
Stay positive.
Stay positive. That's a great message. So thanks again, and hope to see you somewhere on the road soon.
Sounds like a plan. Cheers.